The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified American serial unaliver who was active in and around New Orleans, Louisiana, between May 1918 and October 1919. Press reports during the height of the public panic over the unalivings mentioned similar crimes as early as 1911, but recent researchers have called these reports into question. The attacker was never identified, and the unalivings remain unsolved. As his name implies, the victims usually were attacked with an axe, which often belonged to themselves. In most cases, a panel on the back door of a home was removed by a chisel, which along with the panel was left on the floor near the door. The intruder then attacked one or more of the inhabitants with either an axe or a straight razor. The crimes were motivated by robbery, and the axeman never removed items from his victims' homes. The majority of his victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leading many to believe that the crimes were ethically motivated. Many media outlets sensationalized the aspect of the crimes, even suggesting mafia involvement despite a lack of evidence. Some crime analysts have suggested that the unalivings were actually motivated, and that the unaliver was perhaps an actual sadist, specifically seeking female victims. Criminologists Colin and Damon Wilson hypothesized that the axeman unalived male victims only when they obstructed his attempts to unalive women, supported by cases in which the woman of the household was unalived but not the man. A less plausible theory is that the axeman committed the unalivings in an attempt to promote jazz music, suggested by a written correspondence attributed to the unaliver in which he stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes. On the 13th of March 1919, a letter supposedly from the axeman was published in newspapers, saying that he would unalive again at 15 minutes past midnight on the night of the 19th of March, but would spare the occupants of any place where a jazz band was playing. That night, all of the city's dance halls were filled to capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses around town. There was no unalivings that night. The axeman was never caught or identified, and his crime spree stopped as mysteriously as it started. His identity remains unknown, although various possible identifications of varying plausibility have been proposed. Crime writer Colin Wilson speculates that the axeman could have been Joseph Monfrey, a man shot to death in LA in December 1920 by the widow of Mike Pepitone, the axeman's last known victim. Wilson's theory has been widely repeated in other true crime books and websites. However, true crime writer Michael Newton searched public, police and court records in New Orleans and LA, as well as newspaper archives, and failed to find any evidence of a man named Joseph Monfrey or a similar name having been assaulted or killed in LA. Newton was also not able to find any information that Mrs. Pepitone, identified in some sources as Esther Albano and in others simply as woman who claimed to be Pepitone's widow, was arrested, tried or convicted for such crime, or indeed had been in California. Newton notes that Monfrey was not an unusual surname in New Orleans in the time of the crimes. It appears that there actually may have been an individual named Joseph Monfrey or Mumfrey in New Orleans who had a criminal history and who had been connected with organised crime. However, local records for the period are not extensive enough to allow confirmation of this, or to positively identify the individual. Wilson's explanation is an urban legend, and there is no more evidence now on the identity of the killer than there was at the time of the crimes. Two of the alleged early victims of Axeman, an Italian couple named Ciambra, were shot by an intruder in Lower Ninth Ward home during the early morning hours of the 16th of May 1912. The male Ciambra survived while his wife didn't. In newspaper accounts, the prime suspect was referred to the name of Monfrey more than once. While radically different than the axeman's usual modus operandi, if Joseph Monfrey was indeed the axeman, the Ciambras may well have been the early victims of the future serial killer. According to scholar Richard Warner, the chief suspect in the crimes was Frank Doc Monfrey. 1875 until 1912, he used the alias Leon Joseph Monfrey or Manfrey. Monfrey's Garden District jazz business, previously struggling, was noted by many in the community as seeming to do unusually good business once the city was compelled by the threat of violence to hire jazz bands and play jazz records. On the 23rd of May 1918, Joseph Maggio, an Italian grocer, and his wife Catherine were attacked while sleeping inside their apartment on the corner of Upline and Magnolia Street. The killer broke into the residence and cut the couple's throats with a straight razor. Catherine's throat was cut so deeply that her head was nearly severed from her shoulders. The killer then struck both victims with an axe, perhaps in order to conceal the cause of death. Joseph survived the attack, but died minutes later after being discovered by his brothers, Jake and Andrew. The killer wrote a message on the nearby pavement reading, theorized to be a reference to Anthony and Joanna Sciambra, Italian greengrocers who were attacked, Joanna fatally in 1911. Police found the bloody clothes of the murderer in the apartment, as he had obviously changed into a clean set of clothes before fleeing the scene. A complete search of the premises was not performed after the bodies were removed, yet the bloodstained razor was found on the lawn of a neighbouring property. Police ruled out the robbery as motivation for the attacks, as money and valuables left in plain sight were not stolen by the intruder. The razor was found to belong to Joseph's brother Andrew, who owned a barber shop on Camp Street. His employee, Esteban Torres, told police that Andrew had removed the razor from the shop 2 days prior to the murder, explaining that he wanted to have a nick honed from the blade. Andrew, who lived in an adjoining apartment, reported hearing groaning noises through the wall the night of the murders. Andrew blamed his failure to hear any of the noise related to the attack itself on his intoxicated state. Police, however, were nonetheless surprised that he failed to hear the intruder's forced entry into the home. Andrew became the police's chief suspect in the crime, yet was released after investigators were unable to break down his statement, as well as his account of an unknown man who supposedly seen lurking near the apartment prior to the murders. During the early morning hours of the 27th of June 1918, Louis Baschumer and his mistress Harriet Lowe were attacked in private quarters in the back of Baschumer's grocery, located at the corner of Dorgemois and La Harpe Street. Baschumer was struck with a hatchet above his right temple, which resulted in a possible skull fracture. Lowe was hacked over the left ear and left with one side of her face permanently paralysed. The couple were discovered the following morning alive but critically injured by bakery wagon driver John Zanker, who had come to the grocery store to make a routine delivery. The axe, which belonged to Baschumer himself, was found in an adjacent bathroom. Baschumer stated to investigators that he had been sleeping when he was attacked with a hatchet. Almost immediately, police arrested Louis Aubuchon, a 41-year-old African-American who had been employed in the grocery store just a week before the attack. No evidence existed which could have proved Aubuchon guilty, yet police arrested him nonetheless, stating that he offered conflicting accounts on his whereabouts of the morning of the attack. Aubuchon was later released, however, as police were unable to gather sufficient evidence to hold him. Robbery was said to be the only possible explanation for the attacks, yet no money or valuables were removed from the scene. Lowe became the centre of a media circus as she continually made scandalous and often false statements relating to both the attacks and the character of Baschumer. After Baschumer fell under suspicion of espionage following the discovery of foreign written letters in his possession, Lowe told the police that she thought he was a German spy, resulting in his immediate arrest, although he was released 2 days later. In August 1918, Baschumer was arrested again after Lowe, by then on her deathbed following a failed surgery, named him as her assailant. Baschumer was charged with murder and served 9 months in prison before being acquitted on the 1st of May 1919 after a 10-minute jury deliberation. During the early morning hours of the 5th of August 1918, 28-year-old Anna Schneider, who was 8 months pregnant, awoke to find a dark figure standing over her and was bashed in the face repeatedly. Her scalp was cut open and her face was covered in blood. Anna was discovered after midnight by her husband, Ed Schneider, as he returned late from work. Anna claimed that she remembered nothing of the attack and gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days later. Ed told police that there was nothing stolen from the home besides $6 or $7 that had been in his wallet. The windows and doors of the couple's apartment appeared to have not been forced open, and authorities came to the conclusion that the woman was most likely attacked with a lamp which had been on a nearby table. James Gleason, who police said was an ex-convict, was arrested shortly after Anna was found. He was later released due to lack of evidence. Lead investigators began to publicly speculate that the attack was related to the previous Baschumer and Maggio incidents. On the 10th of August 1918, Pauline and Mary Bruno awoke to the sound of a commotion in the adjoining room where their elderly uncle, Joseph Romano, resided. Upon entering the room, the two sisters discovered that Romano had taken a serious blow to the head, which resulted in 2 open cuts. The assailant was fleeing the scene as they arrived, yet the 2 girls were able to distinguish that he was a dark-skinned, heavy-set man who wore a dark suit and slouched hat. Romano was able to walk to the ambulance once it had arrived, yet sadly died 2 days later due to severe head trauma. His home had been ransacked, yet no items were stolen. Authorities found a bloody axe in the backyard and discovered that the panel in the back door had been chiseled away. The murder created a state of extreme chaos in New Orleans, with residents living in constant fear of the Axeman attack. Police received a slew of reports in which citizens claimed to have seen the killer lurking in local neighborhoods. A few men even called to report that they had found axes in their backyards. John D'Antonio, a then-retired Italian detective, made public statements in which he hypothesized that the man who had committed the recent murders was the same man who had killed several individuals in 1911. D'Antonio described the potential killer as an individual of dual personalities who killed without motive. This type of individual, D'Antonio stated, could very likely have been a normal, law-abiding citizen who was often overcome by an overwhelming desire to kill. He later went on to describe the killer as the real-life Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. On the night of the 10th of March 1919, Italian immigrant Charles Cortimaglia and his family, wife Rosie and infant daughter Mary, were attacked in their residence on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and 2nd Street in Gretna, Louisiana, a New Orleans suburb. Upon hearing screams from their residence, grocer Orlando Giordano rushed across the street to investigate. He discovered that the family had been attacked by the Axeman. Charles and Rosie had both suffered skull fractures from the blows caused by an axe, which was found on the back porch. Mary was killed in her mother's arms from a blow to the back of the neck. Nothing was stolen from the house, but a panel on the back door had been chiseled away. Charles was released 2 days after the attack, while his wife remained in the care of doctors. Upon regaining full consciousness, Rosie made claims that Giordano and his 18-year-old son Frank were responsible for the attacks. Orlando, a 69-year-old man, was in too poor of health to have done so. Frank, more than 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, would have been too large to fit through the panel of the back door. Charles vehemently denied his wife's claims, yet police nonetheless arrested the Giordanos and charged them with murder. The men would later be found guilty. Frank was sentenced to hang and his father life in prison. Charles divorced his wife after the trial. Almost a year later, Rosie admitted that she had falsely accused the Giordanos out of jealousy and spite, resulting in their release. On the 10th of August 1919, grocer Steve Boca was attacked as he slept in his bedroom by an axe-wielding intruder. Boca woke up during the night to find a dark figure looming over his bed. Upon regaining consciousness, Boca ran to the street to investigate the intrusion and found that his head had been cracked open. The grocer ran to the home of his neighbour, Frank Janusa, where he lost consciousness and collapsed. Nothing had been taken from the home yet. Once again, a panel on the back door of their home had been chiselled away. Boca recovered from his injuries but couldn't remember any of the details of the attack. The attack took place after the emergence of the infamous Axeman killer. On the night of the 3rd of September 1919, Sarah Lawman was attacked in her apartment. Neighbours came to check on the young woman who had lived alone and broke into the home when Lawman didn't answer. They discovered the 19-year-old lying unconscious on her bed, suffering from a severe head injury and missing several teeth. The intruder had entered the apartment through an open window and attacked Lawman with a blunt object. A bloody axe was discovered on the front lawn of the building. Lawman recovered from her injuries, yet couldn't recall any details from the attack. On the night of the 27th of October 1919, the wife of Mike Pepitone was awakened by a noise and arrived at the door of her husband's bedroom just as a large, axe-wielding man was fleeing the scene. Pepitone had been struck in the head and was covered in his own blood. Blood spatter covered the majority of the room, including the painting of the Virgin Mary. Pepitone's wife, the mother of 6 children, was unable to describe any characteristics of the unaliver other than large. The Pepitone unaliving was the last of the alleged Axeman attacks. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders, a term coined by the contemporary press, was a series of 4 unsolved serial murders and related violent crimes committed in the Texarkana region of the US in early 1946. They were attributed to the alleged unidentified perpetrator known as the Phantom of Texarkana, the Phantom Killer, or the Phantom Slayer. This hypothetical suspect is credited with attacking 8 people, 5 of them fatally, in a 10-week period. The attacks occurred at night on weekends between the 22nd of February and the 3rd of May, targeting couples. The first 3 attacks occurred at lovers' lanes or quiet stretches of a road in Texas. The 4th attack occurred in an isolated farmhouse in Arkansas. The murders were reported nationally and internationally by several publications and caused a state of panic in Texarkana throughout the summer, while police patrolled the streets and neighborhood. Stores sold out of guns, ammunition, locks, and many other protective devices. Investigations into the murders were conducted at the city, county, state, and federal level. The prime suspect in the case, residents armed themselves and at dusk locked themselves indoors. Career criminal Ewell Swinney was linked to the murders primarily by statements from his wife, plus additional circumstantial evidence. After Swinney's wife refused to testify against him, prosecutors decided against pursuing murder charges. Swinney was however convicted on other charges and sentenced to a long prison sentence. Two of the lead investigators believed that Swinney was guilty of the murders. The book, The Phantom Killer: Unlocking the Mystery of the Texarkana Serial Murders, 2014, written by James Presley, nephew of Sheriff William Hardy Bill Presley, concludes that Swinney is the culprit. The events inspired many works, including the 1976 film The Town That Dreaded Sundown. This film is the basis for much of the subsequent myth and folklore around the murders. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders consisted of 4 violent attacks which occurred over 10 weeks from February to May 1946. The murders occurred in and around Texarkana, Twin Cities, and at the border of Miller County, Arkansas, and Bowie County, Texas. All 4 attacks targeted heterosexual couples in isolated locations on weekend nights. The attacks took place at intervals of 3 and 4 weeks. Investigators speculated that the attacks were the work of an unidentified serial killer. Over time, there have been shifting opinions by officials over whether the first and fourth attacks were committed by the same perpetrator. At around 11:45 p.m. on Friday the 22nd of February, Jimmy Hollis, 25, and his girlfriend Mary Jeanne Leary, 19, parked on a secluded road just outside Texarkana, Texas, after having seen a movie together. The Lovers Lane was approximately 300 feet from the last row of city homes, where present-day Central Mall is located. Around 10 minutes later, a man wearing a white cloth mask, which resembled a pillowcase with eye holes cut out, appeared at Hollis's driver's side door and shone a flashlight in the window. Hollis had told him he had the wrong person, to which the man responded, Both Hollis and Leary were ordered out of the car, and the man ordered Hollis to After he complied, the man struck him twice upon the head with a firearm. Larry told investigators that the noise was so loud she initially thought Hollis had been shot, when in fact she heard his skull fracturing. Thinking the assailant wanted to rob them, Larry showed Hollis's wallet to prove that he had no money, to which she was struck with a blunt object. The assailant ordered Larry to stand, and when she did, told her to run. Lorraine tried to flee towards a ditch, but the assailant ordered her to run up the road. Lorraine spotted an old car parked off the road, but it was empty, and was again confronted by the attacker, who asked her why she was running. When she said that he had told her to do so, he called her a liar before knocking her down and essaying her with the barrel of his gun. After the assault, she fled on foot, running half a mile to a nearby house. She woke the inhabitants and phoned the police. Meanwhile, Hollis had regained consciousness and alerted a passing motorist, who also called the police. Within 30 minutes, Bowie County Sheriff W.H. Bill Presley and 3 other officers arrived at the scene, but the assailant had already left. Lorraine was hospitalized overnight for a minor head wound. Hollis was hospitalized for several days to recover from multiple skull fractures. Hollis and Lorraine gave slightly differing descriptions of the attacker. Lorraine claimed that she could see under the mask that he was a light-skinned African-American male. However, Hollis alternately claimed that the attacker was a tanned white man and around 30 years old, but he conceded that he couldn't distinguish his features as he had been blinded by a flashlight. However, both agreed on the fact that the assailant was around 6 feet tall. Law enforcement repeatedly challenged Lorraine's account and believed that she and Hollis knew the identity of their attacker and were covering for him. Richard Griffin, 29, and his girlfriend of 6 weeks, Polly Ann Moore, 17, were found dead in Griffin's car on the morning of Sunday the 24th of March by a passing motorist. The motorist saw a parked car on Lovers Lane, 100 yards south of US Highway 67 West in Bowie County. Griffin was found between the front seats on his knees, with his head resting on his crossed hands and his pockets turned inside out. Moore was found sprawled face down in the back seat. There's evidence that suggests that she was placed there after being killed on a blanket outside the car. Griffin had been shot twice whilst inside the car, both had been shot once in the back of the head, and both were fully clothed. A blood-soaked patch on the earth near the car suggested to police that they had been killed outside the car and placed back inside. Congealed blood was found covering the running board, and it had flowed through the bottom of the car door. A .32 caliber cartridge casing was also found, possibly ejected from a pistol wrapped in a blanket. No accident reports indicate that either Griffin or Moore was examined by a pathologist. A contemporaneous local rumour said that Moore had been essayed, but modern reports refute the claim. At around 1:30 a.m. on Sunday the 14th of April, Paul Martin, 16, picked up Betty Jo Brooker, 15, from a musical performance at the VFW Club in Texarkana. Martin's body was found at around 6:30 a.m. later that morning, lying on its left side by the northern edge of the North Park Road. Blood was found on the other side of the road by a fence. He'd been shot 4 times through the nose, through the ribs from behind, in the right hand, and through the back of the neck. Brooker's body was found by a search party at around 11:30 a.m., almost 2 miles away from Martin's body. Her body was behind a tree and lying on its back, fully clothed. It was posed with the right hand in the pocket of the buttoned overcoat. Brooker had been shot twice, once through the chest and once in the face. The weapon used was the same as in the first double murder, a .32 automatic Colt pistol. Martin's car was found 3 miles from Brooker's body and 1.55 miles away from his body. It was parked outside Spring Lake Park with the key still in the ignition. Authorities were not sure who was shot first. Presley and the Texas Ranger Manuel T. Gonzalez said that examinations of the bodies indicated that they both put up a terrific struggle. Martin's friend, Tom Alberton, said that he didn't believe an argument had happened between the victims and that Martin had not had any enemies. The 5th murder occurred on Friday the 3rd of May, sometime before 9 p.m, when Vigil Starks, 37, and his wife Katie, 36, were in their home on a 500-acre farm off Highway 67 East, almost 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. Virgil was sitting on an armchair reading the newspaper when he was shot twice in the back of the head from a closed double window. Hearing the sound of broken glass, Katie came from another room and saw Vigil stand up, then slump back into his chair. When she realised he was dead, she ran to crank the telephone to call the police. She rang twice before being shot twice in the face in the same window. She fell but soon regained her footing and tried to get a pistol from another room, but was blinded by her own blood. Katie heard the killer at the back of the house and fled out the front door. She ran barefoot across the street to the home of her sister and brother-in-law. Because no one was home, she ran to neighbour A.V. Prater's house, gasped that, then collapsed. Prater shot a rifle in the air to summon another neighbour, Elmer Taylor, who Prater sent to collect his car. Taylor complied and, along with other members of the Prater family, took Katie to Michael Meagher Hospital, now Miller County Health Unit. Katie was questioned in the operating room by Miller County Sheriff W.E. Davis, who became head of the investigation. 4 days later, Davis talked with Katie again, and she discounted a circulating rumour that Virgil had heard a car outside the home several nights in a row and feared being killed. Investigations of the attacks involved law enforcement officials at the city, county, state and federal levels. Manuel T. Gonzalez was criticised as a showman who presented the work of other officers as his own to the press, and spent a great deal of time with female reporters. 5 years after the murders, Gonzalez left the Rangers to become a technical consultant to the entertainment industry. Law enforcement repeatedly challenged Lorraine's account of the first attack, believing that she and Hollis knew the identity of their attacker and were covering for him. Lorraine returned to Texarkana after the Griffin Moore murders in hopes of helping link the cases and identify the killer, but the Texas Rangers questioned her story and insisted that she knew who the attacker was. Officers didn't publicly connect the Hollis-Lorraine attack to the subsequent murders until the 11th of May, the day after the Texarkana Gazette published an interview with Lorraine when Presley and Reynolds called on the public to immediately report anyone who had unexplained absences when the murders occurred. In response to the Griffin Moore murders, police launched a city-wide investigation along with the Texas and Arkansas police, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the overseeing agency of the Texas Rangers, the Miller and Cass County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI. Over 200 persons were questioned in the case, and about the same number of false leads were checked. In the Martin Brooker case, friends, acquaintances, and several suspects were questioned by Bowie County investigators, who worked in 24-hour shifts. Gonzalez tried basing the perpetrator by recruiting teenagers to sit as decoys in parked cars while officers waited nearby. Officers also volunteered as decoys with real partners on mannequins. Police called for the public to report anyone who owned a flashlight like the one in this picture, found at the Starks murder scene. This was the first spot-coloured photograph published by the Texarkana Gazette. In the aftermath of the Starks murder, officers from the entire area were called upon to help with the investigation. Blockades were set up on Highway 67 East. Those who had been driving in the area at the time of the slaying, along with several men found in the vicinity, were detained for questioning. By the 5th of May, 47 officers were working to solve the murders. On the 9th of May, a mobile radio station arrived with 20 Arkansas State Police officers and a fleet of 10 prowl cars equipped with two-way radios to help coordinate the growing investigation. On the 11th of May, a teletype machine was installed in the Bowie County Sheriff's Office to connect with other law enforcement officers in Texas. The unofficial theory for the motive amongst the majority of officers was that of as large amounts of money in the home were not taken, nor was Katie's purse. By the 30th of March, police had posted a $500 reward, $8,035 in 2024, in an effort to gain any new information on the case. But this produced over 100 false leads and no fruitful clues with all suspects. Within days of the Brooker Martin murders, the reward fund had exceeded $1,700, $27,380 in 2024. It rose to $7,025, $113,145 in 2024 on the night of the Starks murder, and passed $10,000, equivalent to $161,061 in 2024, in the following 10 days. There was some hesitation in linking the Starks murder to the other crimes because the weapon used was a .22, and Davis believed it was an automatic rifle. By November 1948, authorities no longer considered the Starks murder connected to the two double murders. The Griffin Moore murders raised public concerns but were generally taken as an isolated incident, as officials didn't publicly connect the earlier